Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first Twitter Spaces of MOI. Today, we have Ananatha Krishan, the CEO at Server Labs, with us, who will be talking about his experience in Web 2 and in Web 3, and his experience about why Web 3 is not able to become mainstream despite being such a efficient solution for so many things. Mainly, the problem is that the true decentralization we have not been able to achieve, because to be truly decentralized you need to put user in control. So I would like to invite Ananta to join us, and maybe we can have a discussion. Hi Ananta, welcome.
Hi, Geetika. Thank you. Thanks for hosting me.
Our pleasure, Ananta. So I just wanted to get started. If you can tell a little bit about your background and your experience in the technology industry in Web 2 and as well as on Web 3. If you can give us a short introduction, will be great.
Sure. I started my career as a programmer at Oracle a long time back, and then built some really cool database technologies, and then was at Accenture and Anderson Consulting for a long time, taking technology and making business solutions out of it. And off late from 2017, I've been working on figuring out a way to make sure the internet and Web3 that we have today is practically usable and provides the kind of benefits that it can for both enterprises and users alike. So that, in a nutshell, is my background.
That's awesome, Ananta. If you can tell us a little bit about what are your thoughts about the state of Web 3 right now, where we are, and are we heading in the right direction? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I think Web3 is great, right? I think it has made lot of progress. But to really look at this question in a uh, uh, very logical way, we need to look at where we have come from. So, if you would indulge me, computing started in about 1950, when with the advent of mainframes uh, and solutions which can basically uh, automate a business process. So, the early uh, computing age was all around automation, efficiency, and speed of a business process. And there was no idea of even a transaction, right? Those days it was just about a smart way to create efficiency in a system. And computers were very useful, but they were mainly technology was a supporting artist. And the metric that most people went by, the business models that, that were there at that point, was primarily revenue. And this idea of computers being very close to human processes was not around. So that was the first probably 20, 30 years of computers and digital and what is generally called as the computing age, right? So process automation, mechanization, efficiency, speed were the primary drivers. Then with the advent of TCP/IP in say 1970s, early 1970s, it went through a big change. Computers could now connect and talk to each other. There was the ability for us to share information, and that's when this whole idea of an web of an interconnected computers providing some capability uh, came up. And the migration there, if you look at it, is like more and more capabilities which were closer to what we do in real life was supported by uh, supported by digital, and that we call as an information age. And if you want to think of it, you can break that into uh, two pieces. One is the more client server age, where computers started doing more business processes and automation, but then there is a recognition of a customer which started to emerge, right? So computers were able to identify customers. Role of technology moved from a supporting situation to an enabling situation. And in the first maybe 20, 25 years of that journey, which is probably Web 1.0. Uh, Client server was the capability, and Web 1.0 was very static. Static information. The idea of customer did exist, but then very rudimentary information transfers across a distributed network. An open network was the capability. So that, and then in about the early 2000s, that's when the Web 2.0 capability came up, where you have social media type capabilities, and the idea of a platform based solution which allowed customers to access capabilities which were more human like, right? So great progress there, new business model, a lot of value got released, and platforms like the Facebook, the Orkuts, the Googles of the world came up, and enormous amount of value was released. But then you will all agree with me that there was enough asymmetry in that, right? So there was it was very, technology became a more enabling artist, but then the world became flat, information get enabled. So the idea of transaction and customer centricity kind of evolved, but then still controlled by intermediaries, although there was a significant value release. Then maybe the last maybe 10, 15 years, I think, the peer-to-peer computing, which we call as Web 3.0 today, started, right? It's not, it didn't happen in the last 5 years. It's probably the early Napsters of the world allowed peer-to-peer computing, where there was no need of an intermediary. So you were able to transfer information from one computer to another computer without really going through an intermediary. And this opened up a lot of opportunities for us to do a model where uh, kind of we can do even more human-like capabilities without needing an intermediary. It became peer-to-peer computing. That's where Web 3.0 got started. And if you look at the initial use case of Bitcoin, which allowed you to transfer some monetary value recognized through cryptography, was you're able to transfer in a peer-to-peer model. But that was one use case, right? So it was use case which proved that peer-to-peer computing will be able to do, or Web3 will be able to value transfers, and that was magical. So a lot of progress has been made after that. So we are able to do new value transfers today after that, using technologies like Ethereum and like, where more and more new type of value transfers can happen in a peer-to-peer model. And so great progress. So if you want to think of it, initially computing was very supporting. In the information age, it became enabling, but it was still centralized and controlled. And the digital age, which is what we're just getting started uh, with Web 3.0 today, enabling value transfers in a decentralized fashion, and the role of technology has become very integrated. In this entire journey, if you want to look at it, one thing that we need to keep in mind is technology is getting closer and closer to doing human-like interactions. So initially it was automation, then it became customer-centric. Now it is getting interaction-centric. When we say interaction, what we mean by that is the ability to do peer-to-peer activity without having an intermediary, and the ability to do interactions which go over and beyond just an monetary value transfer. So that's where we are. Great progress, and we are entering this age of digital, with the ability for computers to enable a digital society through an interaction centric model. That's where we are today. So I think exciting days to come, Geetika.
Thank you for taking us through the entire journey, Ananta. It was a very good recap, I would say, of how Web3 has evolved and how the concept of Web3 came into picture. But why do you think that it has not become mainstream yet, or why? Like, what can we do to make it more practical and more suitable for daily use cases?
Yeah, so the very good question, very good question, and while we just need to recognize where we are, right? So there's a lot of talk around the metaverse and the emerging digitally interacting world, as I call it, right? Where digital is kind of becoming your main way of doing work, right? So you no longer are just transferring money using digital, or you just using social media apps, but we are trying, digital is, the digital society is going to do everything using digital technology. So what that means is the new age of Web3, where it is, if it has to become relevant and practical, it has to be able to do human-like interactions, right? It has to be easy. You should be able to use it as though you would interact in your day-to-day life, right? Your peer-to-peer computing needs to work and support human-like interactions. So therein lies the problem. Today, obviously, initially, as I told you, in Bitcoin, we started with an economic value transfer. So if you look at it today, Ethereum and other protocols support value transfers, but in a very systemic way. What we mean by that is uh, this emerging metaverse or the emerging the digitally interacting world needs differentiated user experiences. When we say user experience, it could be how we use identity, how we use data, how do you use trust, and how do you use compute. You need differentiated user experience for different interactions. So that's the necessity how interactions operate, right, in real life. So let us take a very simple example. Say you want to go to Starbucks and buy a coffee. You have some level of risk tolerance and user experience that you want to have, and if you want to do digital and Web3 to support that, that's very different than if you're going to go buy a house in Beverly Hills for $1 million. So that's a completely different expectation in real life, the kind of risk preference, the kind of experience that you want to have in these two interactions are foundationally different. But today's Web3 systems are not able to accommodate that, right? So that it's a one size fits all model. Yes, that's where we typically get started. But for Web3 to become mainstream and support the kind of the emerging digitally interacting world metaverse, you need to be able to support differentiated user experiences. So there, another example, say for example, say you go to a vacation and you have pictures that you want to store, right? You want to, and you also have legal documents that you want to store. Today, there is no way for me to tell the same application or the same capability to provide you the differentiated user experience. You may want to store it in different places with different levels of security, different levels of encryption, whatever it is. For example, in real life, you may store your pictures in your chest, and then you may put your uh, legal documents in a safe in a bank. But then, so that is just another level of another simple example where the user experience is different for different interactions, and it's also person dependent. Different people have different risk profiles, different people have different value expectations. So if Web3 need to support the emerging digitally interacting world of the metaverses, the user experience needs to be different for each interaction based on the participants of the interaction, and that's not possible in today's Web3 systems. And some attempts have been made. For example, if you look at it, for every user experience or the class of user experiences, different different applications are being built, different blockchains are being built, and uh, that creates a problem, right? So if you build different for each user experience and the type of user experience as we scale to metaverse, you can't build applications in separate blockchains and bridges, and you can see how inefficient and complicated it can get, right? So the ability for you to be able to support the metaverse, Web3 needs to have the capability to support personalized user experiences across identity, storage, ledger, compute, and value in a practical manner so that the needs of all participants can be taken care of. And I think therein lies the problem. So you need to move from a system centric idea to a personalized idea so that Web3 becomes practical and usable and sustainable for everyone. And that's where our opportunity is.
That's a very valid example, Ananta. Like both the examples, whether it's a coffee and a house example or whether the photograph example, because we do tend to have different criteria depending on our needs. We might not want to, have same kind of experience for all our transactions.
Mhm.
So, I remember we having this conversation about where you were telling me like a truly decentralized system is user controlled
Mhm.
and not infrastructure enabled.
Yeah.
So, if you could shed a little more light on that.
Yeah. So see, decentralization is a very interesting idea, right? So decentralization. So when we moved from Web 2 to Web 3, obviously the asymmetry in value generation in Web 2 was skewed more towards a centralized enterprise. So we wanted to move to a decentralized enterprise. But if you peel the onion a little bit and understand what decentralization means, so decentralization of the infrastructure is not what is really important. While it is important, what it means to every individual, what decentralization means is his ability to control the infrastructure the way he or she wants. And that's the true definition of decentralization, right? So it is in so that needs to be understood. So decentralization is not just about an infrastructure migration from cloud environment to an environment of people who independently put their infrastructure. That's great. But then as an individual, what it means for me when you move from Web 2 to Web 3 or to the decentralized world is my ability to manage, and it's different for different people, the infrastructure. When we say infrastructure, it's ID, storage, value, trust, and compute in a manner that I want. That's what decentralization means for each individual. And that's what Web 3 needs to enable. The first step of making the infrastructure decentralized is great, but that wouldn't be able to deliver the kind of benefits or the outcomes that we set out to do unless we move the control back to the individual. And it has to be done in a very native way. The protocol needs to be able to manage it in a native way so that the applications don't have this control. So today, personalization or the user's choice is an attribute of the application, but that wouldn't cut it, right? We are moving away from an application age to an interaction age where there's going to be peer-to-peer computing. So the user needs to be able to control all of that, and that's what uh, true decentralization means. And if you want look of it, want to think of it, right? About 7 8 years back, the whole idea was to set up a global computer, right? So while it is very ideal to set up a global computer, the ability for you to compute in a Turing complete way across the network may not be the requirement for every use cases, and that's kind of the albatross around the neck of most of Web 3 applications today. So you need to be another point is you need to practically be able to move, right? So you don't have to move every application to an global computer where a Turing complete execution environment exists for you to take advantage of the other benefits of what Web 3 has to offer. So the other problem which needs to be addressed and where Web 3 needs to move is a practical way to decompartmentalize the overall opportunity that we have so that people can migrate from Web 2 to Web 3 in a practical way, keeping user at the center of all of it.
Interesting. So, Ananta, if you can shed some light on why personalized internet is needed and how personalized internet is an answer to all these challenges, how can MOI basically change the way decentralization works right now?
Great question. At MOI, I think how one of the key aspects, obviously, is your ability to what when we say personalized internet, what we mean by is the ability for you to manage and control the entire infrastructure, right? Based on what your interaction specific needs are. So at MOI, what we have done is we have, without getting into the details of how we have really built it, at a very high level, we have done two things which allows this capability to happen or to allow us to build a personalized internet. One, what we have done is we have come up with a new ordering mechanism. So if you want to think of an ordering mechanism, is the ability for an intermediary to determine what the value is. So let me explain that a little bit. In an open system or a network where there are anonymous participants who are determining the state transition for value discovery, what we mean by that is if you're transferring an information, there is not much you need to do. But then Web 3 is an attempt to make internet stateful, right? Which means you transfer value. The value could be monetary or otherwise. So resource gets moved from one person to another person, whatever that is, and that transfer needs to be validated and recognized by the entire network. So the integrity of the data is maintained. So you need some kind of an intermediary who determines this. When we say intermediary, some definition of some entity which manages that. Today, if you look at centralized systems, it's the computers in the centralized environment which determines that. How does that happen in the decentralized world? Obviously, you need to make sure the participants who determine this value transfer and act as the intermediaries are honest and truthful. But there is no guarantee for that. And to enable that, so what they do is, if you're going to be honest and truthful, some kind of resource commitment they make. It's like if I decide to buy a house, I need to pay in advance so that I know he's honest and truthful. So if you look at it, the two attempts that has been made today are been systemic, which is being used in most of the decentralized environments. One is obviously the scarce resource that was used in the Bitcoin world is the proof of work, is a resource like a computing resource, is a scarce resource, which putting that out there as my equity in the networks allows the system to make sure that you are a true participant and you can determine the value transfer. And then came the monetary angle, right? Proof of stake systems, you say the scarce resource is money. The first system said the scarce resource was computing. Proof of stake system says the scarce resource is economic. So as long as you make an economic stake, the network will understand that you are the right intermediary to do the value transfer. Both of them are very systemic. What we have done is, with some foundational design and thinking, we have come up with a new scarce resource. We say the people are the scarcest resource. So made it completely people centric. So the idea of a participant being the central entity around which the network is organized allows me to order in a different way and make it very personalized. So the network becomes very personalized. That's one foundational design change that we have done, which allows the participants of the network, as opposed to the nodes in the network, be the central intermediaries of truth. That is one large idea that we have built, which allows MOI to make, because we put the participant in the center of everything, allows MOI to make the internet personal. The other thing is, we have decoupled the four foundational ideas in Web3: ID, storage, value, which also includes ledger, and also the compute. So by decoupling the architecture, we have made sure there's a practical way for existing applications to access the different capabilities of Web3 so that they can move to Web3 in a manner which is suitable to each use case. So there are two primary ideas which have allowed MOI to make this journey on the personalized internet. One, making the user the central user or the participant the central resource around which the network is built, and two, a practical decoupling of the different capabilities of Web3 so that applications can move to different access and move to the different parts of the value chain based on what their needs are. So at a very high level, that's what MOI has done. I'm more than happy to take these things on a call later.
Yes, makes sense, Ananta. Let's not get into technical details in this particular session. We'll have a lot of other sessions and take up maybe different aspects of MOI technology and discuss them in detail. So what you said is actually a very good high level overview of the concept and what MOI is trying to achieve. But it cannot be done just by a particular set of people, right? It has to be a revolution. It has to be a community driven effort. So how do you think that can be taken forward?
Yeah, so the first recognition is to say that personalized internet and the user ownership and control of the environment is the need of the hour for Web3 to become practical and relevant, right? So personalized internet is a journey. So different people can participate in different aspects of it and try to provide contribute so that it becomes relevant and valuable. So the community has to get involved, and part of this creating this personalized internet, the web for all, right? Which allows users to modulate how the behavior is. And through that, what you can do is this personalized internet will allow us to build a sustainable solution which is practical and also equitable, right? So that's where, so for example, people, we are at this point trying to build a network with 500,000 validators, right? So anybody can become a validator, anybody can become an arbiter of the truth in the network. So which allows different people to participate. We at scale in about 3 years plan to have about 2 to 3 million validator nodes and spread across the globe, so which allows all participants to influence and manage the network and contribute towards the network, and also make sure the local needs are appropriately met, right? So every interaction has got, so personalized internet should be the goal of the community. So how do we personalize depends upon what level of contribution that each and everyone wants to make. And the starting point would be to recognize that we need a personalized internet and put the user ownership and control as the foundational theme of Web3, so that the emerging digital world is not only practical and sustainable but also equitable. I think we need to make personalized internet as the journey of web, so it becomes relevant to all.
Personalized internet is indeed a journey, and I guess it has to be a community driven effort. Like one company, one product, one blockchain probably won't be able to achieve it. It's about changing the perspective, how we think, imagine things, how we think
Yep.
of decentralization. Yeah. So it's
So
a mind shift change as well.
absolutely, I think if you want to think of it close, right? Uh, today's in today's network or today's Web3, the user needs to adapt how to the behavior of the network. So that's the situation today. So world of personalized internet, web for all, the network need to adapt how the users want to use the network, and that's where we need to take it. And I think that's a journey, and with everybody being part of it, personalized internet is a journey where the user will be in control of everything, and more is just an attempt to get that started.
Right, right. So, in audience, if anybody has any question, please feel free to ask. You can request to speak, and I'll provide you the platform. Okay, I guess we don't have many questions. Maybe people are still trying to digest all the concepts that we discussed today. If anybody has any question, please feel free to post on MOI.Technology Twitter handle, and the team will answer them as soon as possible. I thank you all for your time. Thank you so much, Anantha. It was, I think, a great session, a great start. We'll do these sessions regularly and discuss in more detail about how exactly the personalized internet works. I guess we discussed the concept today, but how we can achieve this is a conversation for some other time.
Great, thank you, Geetika. Appreciate you hosting this. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great weekend. Thank you.